Have you ever felt like someone was watching you? Maybe you were alone in your room, or walking down a quiet street at night, and suddenly you felt eyes on you. It's a strange feeling, isn't it? Your heart beats a little faster. You look around, but you don't see anyone. Still, you can't shake the feeling that you're not alone. Tonight, I'm going to share 3 true stories about people who felt that same feeling. These are stories about being watched, stories that will make you think twice the next time you're alone. So, get comfortable, turn down the lights, and listen closely, because sometimes, the feeling of being watched is not just in your head. Story 1, The Man in the Window. Sarah had always loved rainy nights. She would sit by her window, a cup of tea in her hands, and watch the world outside turn dark and quiet. The rain made her feel safe, like she was wrapped in a soft blanket, hidden away from the busy world. Her apartment was small but cozy, with old wooden floors that creaked when she walked and big windows that let in the soft glow of the streetlights. She had just moved in a few months ago, and she was still getting used to living alone. Sometimes, the silence felt heavy, but she liked the freedom. She could read late into the night, play her favorite music, or just sit and listen to the rain. On this particular night, the rain was falling harder than usual. The wind rattled the windows, and the street outside was empty. Sarah was curled up on her couch, a thick blanket wrapped around her legs, reading a mystery novel. The only light in the room came from a small lamp on the table beside her. The rest of the apartment was dark, the shadows deep and still. She felt peaceful, almost sleepy, as she turned the pages of her book. But then, something changed. It was a small thing at first, a feeling, like a cold breath on the back of her neck. She paused, her eyes still on the page, and listened. The rain tapped against the glass, steady and soft. The wind howled down the street, making the old building groan. She tried to go back to her book, but the feeling wouldn't go away. It grew stronger, a prickling on her skin, a sense that she was not alone. She looked up from her book and glanced at the window. The glass was fogged with her breath, and the street outside was dark. She could see the glow of the streetlights, the wet pavement shining in the rain. For a moment, she saw nothing unusual, but then, a flash of lightning lit up the street, and she saw it, a face in the window. It was only there for a second, but it was enough. The face was pale, almost white, with wide, staring eyes and a thin, twisted mouth. It was pressed against the glass, so close that she could see the fog of its breath. Sarah's heart stopped. She couldn't move. She just stared, frozen, as the lightning faded and the face disappeared into the darkness. She blinked, trying to convince herself it was just her imagination. Maybe it was a reflection, or a trick of the light. She stood up slowly, her legs shaking, and walked to the window. She pressed her hand against the cold glass and looked out. The street was empty. The rain was falling harder now, making it hard to see. She wiped the fog from the window and looked again, but there was nothing there. Just the empty street, the wet pavement, and the soft glow of the streetlights. She tried to laugh it off, but she couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been there. She went back to her couch and pulled the blanket tighter around her. She tried to read, but she couldn't focus. Every sound made her jump. The wind rattled the windows, and the rain tapped against the glass. She kept glancing at the window, half expecting to see the face again. Then, she heard a sound. It was soft at first, almost like a whisper. Tap, tap, tap. She looked at the window. The sound came again. Tap, tap, tap. It was slow and steady, like someone was tapping on the glass with their finger. Sarah's hands started to shake. She grabbed her phone and called her best friend. "Hey, can you talk for a minute?" she whispered. Her friend could hear the fear in her voice. "What's wrong?" "I think someone's outside my window," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "Are you sure? Maybe it's just the rain." No, I saw a face, and now there's this tapping sound. Her friend tried to calm her down, but Sarah couldn't relax. She stood up and walked to the window again. She pulled the curtain aside and looked out. Nothing, just the empty street and the rain. Suddenly, her phone buzzed. She looked down and saw a text from an unknown number. It said, "I see you." Sarah's heart stopped. She stared at the message, her mind racing. She called the police, her voice barely more than a whisper. They told her to stay inside and lock the doors. She checked every lock, every window, making sure everything was secure. She sat in the middle of the living room, clutching her phone, waiting for the police to arrive. When they got there, they searched the area but didn't find anyone. But they did find muddy footprints outside her window. The prints led up to the glass and then disappeared into the darkness. The police said it was probably just a prank. But Sarah knew better. She could still feel those eyes on her, watching her from the shadows. She moved out the next day. She found a new apartment in a different part of town. But sometimes, late at night, she still feels those eyes on her. She keeps her curtains closed and her doors locked. But the fear never really goes away. She wonders if the man in the window is still out there, waiting for her to let her guard down. But that's not the end of Sarah's story. After she moved, she tried to forget what happened. She started a new job, made new friends, and tried to fill her days with work and laughter. But the nights were still hard. She would lie in bed, listening to the sounds of the city outside her window, and remember the face in the glass. One night, a few weeks after she moved, she was walking home from work. It was late, and the streets were quiet. She felt safe in her new neighborhood, but as she turned the corner onto her street, she felt that same cold chill. She looked around, but there was no one there. She walked faster, her heart beating hard in her chest. When she got to her building, she fumbled with her keys, her hands shaking. She glanced over her shoulder, half expecting to see someone standing in the shadows. But the street was empty. She hurried inside and locked the door behind her. She tried to tell herself it was just her imagination, but the feeling wouldn't go away. She made herself a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the rain fall. She tried to read, but she couldn't focus. Every sound made her jump. She kept glancing at the window, half expecting to see the face again. That night, she had a dream. She was back in her old apartment, sitting on the couch, reading her book. The rain was falling outside, and the wind was howling. She looked up and saw the face in the window, staring at her with wide, empty eyes. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. She woke up, her heart pounding, her sheets soaked with sweat. The next morning, she found a note slipped under her door. It was a single piece of paper, folded in half. She opened it with shaking hands. The note said, "I found you." Sarah called the police again, but they couldn't do anything. There were no fingerprints, no evidence, nothing to prove that anyone had been there. She started to feel like she was losing her mind. She stopped sleeping, stopped eating, stopped going out at night. She kept her curtains closed and her doors locked, but the fear never really went away. One night, she heard a sound outside her window. It was soft at first, like a whisper. Tap, tap, tap. She froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She grabbed her phone and called her friend, but the call wouldn't go through. She sat in the dark, listening to the tapping, too afraid to move. The next morning, she found muddy footprints outside her window. The prints led up to the glass and then disappeared into the darkness. She called the police again, but they still couldn't help her. She started to feel like she was being hunted, like the man in the window was always one step behind her. Sarah moved again, this time to a different city. She changed her name, got a new job, and tried to start over. But the fear never really left her. She still feels those eyes on her, watching her from the shadows. She wonders if the man in the window is still out there, waiting for her to let her guard down. Have you ever looked out your window at night and wondered if someone was looking back? Story 2: The Eyes in the Woods. Jake had always loved the woods. Ever since he was a little boy, he felt at home among the trees. He remembered walking with his father on old trails, learning how to spot animal tracks, and listening to the wind in the leaves. The forest was a place of peace for him, a place where he could breathe and think. As he grew older, he started going on hikes by himself. He liked the quiet, the way the world seemed to slow down when he was surrounded by nature. One autumn, Jake decided to go on a solo camping trip. He wanted to get away from the noise of the city, from work, from everything. He picked a spot deep in the woods, far from any roads or houses. He packed his tent, his sleeping bag, some food, and a flashlight. He left his phone in the car, wanting to disconnect completely. The hike to his campsite took most of the day. The air was cool and crisp, and the leaves were turning red and gold. He felt happy, free, and alive. When he reached his spot, he set up his tent near a small clearing. There was a little stream nearby, and the only sounds were the water, the birds, and the wind. He built a small fire, cooked some food, and watched the sun set behind the trees. As the sky turned dark, he lay on his back and looked up at the stars. There were so many, more than he ever saw in the city. He felt small, but in a good way, like he was part of something bigger. The first night was peaceful. He slept well, listening to the sounds of the forest. In the morning, he made coffee on his little camp stove and watched the mist rise from the ground. He spent the day exploring, following deer trails and climbing over fallen logs. He found a patch of wild berries and ate them for lunch. He felt like he could stay there forever. But on the second night, something changed. As he sat by his fire, roasting a marshmallow, he started to feel uneasy. It was a slow feeling, like a shadow creeping up behind him. He tried to ignore it, telling himself it was just the darkness, but the feeling grew stronger. He felt like he was being watched. He looked around, shining his flashlight into the trees. The beam of light cut through the darkness, but he didn't see anything, just the trunks of the trees, the leaves rustling in the wind, and the empty woods. He tried to laugh at himself, but the feeling wouldn't go away. He kept glancing over his shoulder, expecting to see something, or someone, standing there. He put more wood on the fire, making it burn brighter. The light made him feel a little safer. He sat close to the flames, listening to the crackle of the fire and the sounds of the night. But then, he saw them, two eyes, shining in the darkness, just beyond the edge of the firelight. At first, he thought it was an animal, maybe a deer, or a raccoon, but the eyes were too high off the ground, and they didn't move. They just stared at him, unblinking. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. He called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" His voice sounded small in the quiet woods. The eyes didn't move. They just kept watching him. Jake felt his heart start to race. He grabbed his flashlight and shined it toward the eyes, but as soon as the light hit them, they disappeared. He stood up, turning in a slow circle, shining his light all around. There was nothing there, just the trees and the darkness. He sat back down, trying to calm himself. He told himself it was just an animal, maybe a fox or an owl, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was not alone. He put out his fire, crawled into his tent, and zipped it up tight. He lay in his sleeping bag, listening to every sound, the wind in the trees, the water in the stream, the distant call of an owl. But every now and then, he thought he heard footsteps, soft, slow, moving through the leaves. He barely slept that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw those shining eyes staring at him from the darkness. When the sun finally rose, he got up and stepped outside. The woods looked different in the daylight, peaceful, safe. He almost laughed at himself for being so scared. But then he saw the footprints. They were all around his tent, circling it again and again. They were not animal tracks. They were human footprints, big and clear in the soft earth. Jake felt his stomach drop. He looked around, but there was no one there. The woods were silent. He packed up his things as quickly as he could. He wanted to get out of there, to get back to his car and drive home. As he walked, he kept looking over his shoulder. Every time he stopped, he thought he heard footsteps behind him. He would turn around, but there was nothing there, just the trees, the wind, and the empty woods. The hike back felt much longer than before. The woods seemed darker, the shadows deeper. Jake tried to walk fast, but he kept stumbling over roots and rocks. He felt like he was being followed, like someone was just out of sight, watching him. When he finally reached his car, he threw his things in the back and locked the doors. He sat there for a long time, catching his breath, his hands shaking. He looked back at the woods, half expecting to see someone standing among the trees. But there was nothing, just the quiet forest, the leaves blowing in the wind. Jake never went camping alone again. He still loved the woods, but he never forgot the feeling of those eyes watching him in the darkness. Sometimes, when he's out hiking with friends, he'll stop and listen, just to make sure he's really alone. And every now and then, when the woods are quiet and the shadows are long, he thinks he sees something, two eyes, shining in the darkness, watching him from the trees. The woods are full of secrets, and sometimes, the trees aren't the only things watching you. Story 3: The Hidden Camera. Emily had always dreamed of living on her own. She grew up in a busy house with 3 younger brothers, 2 dogs, and parents who always seemed to be talking or working or cleaning. She loved her family, but she wanted her own space, a quiet place where she could read, listen to music, and just be herself. So, when she finally got her first job after college, she started looking for an apartment. She searched for weeks, scrolling through listings online, visiting places after work, and talking to landlords. Most of the apartments were too expensive, too small, or too far from her job. She was starting to feel discouraged when she found a listing for a 1-bedroom apartment in a nice neighborhood. The rent was low, the pictures looked great, and the landlord seemed friendly on the phone. Emily went to see it the next day. The apartment was perfect. It was on the 3rd floor of an old brick building, with big windows that let in lots of light. The living room had wooden floors and a little balcony that looked out over a quiet street. The kitchen was small but clean, and the bedroom had a big closet. Emily could picture herself living there, cooking dinner, reading on the balcony, having friends over for movie nights. She signed the lease that afternoon. Moving in was exciting. Emily bought new curtains, a soft rug, and a set of dishes with little blue flowers on them. She hung up pictures of her family and friends, put her favorite books on the shelves, and set up her laptop on a small desk by the window. For the first time in her life, she felt truly independent. The first few weeks were wonderful. Emily loved coming home to her own space. She would light a candle, make a cup of tea, and sit on the balcony as the sun went down. She started a little herb garden on the windowsill and made friends with the cat that lived in the building next door. She felt safe and happy. But after a while, Emily started to notice little things that made her uneasy. Sometimes, she would come home and find that something had been moved, a book on the wrong shelf, a mug in a different spot, a pillow turned the wrong way. At first, she thought she was just being forgetful. She was busy at work, and maybe she just didn't remember where she put things. But the feeling grew stronger. One night, she was lying in bed, reading, when she heard a faint clicking sound. It was soft, almost like the ticking of a clock, but it was coming from the corner of the room. She sat up and listened, but the sound stopped. She got out of bed and checked the window, the closet, and even under the bed, but she didn't find anything. She told herself it was just the building settling, or maybe the pipes. A few days later, she heard the clicking sound again. This time, it was coming from the living room. She walked out, her heart beating fast, and listened. The sound stopped as soon as she entered the room. She looked around, but everything seemed normal. She tried to laugh it off, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Emily started to feel nervous in her own apartment. She double-checked the locks every night and kept the curtains closed. She stopped inviting friends over, afraid that they would think she was being paranoid. She tried to focus on work, but she was tired all the time. She started having trouble sleeping, waking up in the middle of the night with the feeling that someone was watching her. One Saturday morning, Emily decided to clean her apartment from top to bottom. She dusted the shelves, vacuumed the rug, and wiped down the kitchen counters. When she got to the bedroom, she noticed that the smoke detector on the ceiling looked different from the others in the apartment. It was newer, and there was a tiny, blinking red light on the side. She climbed up on a chair to take a closer look. As she reached up, she realized that the smoke detector wasn't attached to the ceiling properly. She twisted it, and it came off in her hand. Inside, she found a small camera, hidden behind the plastic cover. Emily stared at it in shock. Her hands started to shake. She climbed down from the chair and sat on the bed, holding the camera in her lap. She felt sick. Someone had been watching her, in her bedroom, in her most private moments. She thought about all the times she had changed clothes, talked on the phone, or just sat and read in her room. She felt exposed, violated, and scared. Emily called the police. Her voice was shaking as she explained what she had found. The officers arrived quickly and searched the apartment. They found 2 more hidden cameras, one in the living room, tucked behind a vent, and another in the bathroom, hidden in a small hole in the wall. Emily felt like she couldn't breathe. She sat on the couch, hugging her knees to her chest, while the police searched every inch of her apartment. The landlord was arrested that afternoon. The police told Emily that he had been secretly recording tenants for years. He had hidden cameras in several apartments in the building. Emily felt angry, scared, and betrayed. She packed a bag and went to stay with a friend. Even after the landlord was gone, Emily never felt safe in that apartment again. She moved out as soon as she could, breaking her lease and finding a new place across town. But the feeling of being watched never really left her. She started checking every room, every corner, every time she went somewhere new. She covered the cameras on her laptop and phone, and she never stayed in a hotel without checking for hidden cameras. Emily tried to move on with her life, but the fear stayed with her. She had nightmares about being watched, about someone hiding in the shadows, recording her every move. She stopped trusting people. She stopped feeling safe in her own home. Sometimes, late at night, Emily would sit in her new apartment and listen to the quiet. She would look around, checking the corners, the vents, the smoke detectors. She knew it was probably just her imagination, but she couldn't help it. The fear was always there, just beneath the surface. How well do you really know the place you call home? Are you sure you're alone? So, now you've heard 3 true stories about people who felt that strange, cold feeling, the feeling of being watched. Maybe you felt it too, just for a moment, as you listened in the dark, or as you glanced at your own window, or checked the corners of your room. Maybe you remembered a time when you felt eyes on you, even though you were sure you were alone. Thank you for spending your time with me tonight, and for letting me share these chilling stories with you. If you enjoyed this video, please let me know by leaving a like, subscribing to the channel, and sharing your own stories in the comments below. I love reading your experiences, and who knows, maybe your story will be featured in a future video. Until next time, good night, and don't forget to check behind you, just in case.